accounts. Elon Musk, we're going to get deep into it. It's going to be a lot of Elon talk, a lot of FEMA stuff, maybe talk about some conspiracy theories that are going around.
Why not?
But Batya, why don't we start with Kamala Harris,
Yes.
who has been doing something of a media blitz, if you consider the word blitz to mean going on a whole bunch of very friendly podcasts, with the exception of 60 Minutes, which was actually a decent interview. But what are we looking at, Batya?
Yeah, so on Sunday, Kamala Harris's interview with the Call Her Daddy podcast dropped. Now, Harris rarely does long-form interviews, which prompted the host of this show, Alex Cooper, to ask why she decided to appear on Call Her Daddy.
I know.
Let's take a look at
I know the answer to this question.
Let's see how Vice President Harris answered the question.
Curious, like, you don't do too many long-form interviews. What made you want to do Call Her Daddy today?
Well, I think you and your listeners have really got this thing right, which is one of the best ways to communicate with people is to be real, you know, and to talk about the things that people really care about. I mean, what I love about what you do is that your voice in your show is really about your listeners. And I think especially now, this is a moment in the country and in life where people really want to know they're seen and heard and that they're part of a community, that they're not out there alone. And so I'm really glad to be with you.
Much of the conversation was focused on women's issues or what passes for women's issues, in this conversation, specifically abortion. Here's one moment from the interview to give you a sense of how things went.
Each of these guys up in these state capitals are writing these decisions because they somehow have decided that they're in a better position to tell you what's in your best interest than you are to know what's in your own best interest. It's outrageous.
It's outrageous. I mean, Daddy Gang, to put it in our TikTok terms. I have seen tampons we use. Do you even know how, like, do you know what a X or Y or Z is of a part of our, and they don't know the answer.
I was the first vice president or president to ever,
Men don't know what
in office,
parts are.
go to a reproductive health care clinic, ever.
Really?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I didn't know that, but I guess that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. To your point.
To your point.
To your point.
Okay.
Yes.
Michael, let me tell you why I found this interview so frustrating, and I'm very curious, as a man,
Yes.
your take on this. It seems to me like there's this sort of fantasy that gets perpetuated by often very privileged women, that women are somehow still oppressed in this country, when the truth is the exact opposite. The life expectancy gap is growing between men and women.
Yeah, you're beating us.
Women are now 15 points more likely to have a college degree,
Correct.
which, as we know, is one of the
Yes.
main predictors for access to home ownership and the American dream. Men represent 3/4 of the deaths of despair, obviously, which is accounted for in that the plummeting life expectancy, specifically for men without a college degree. And what you have is women who are like the least likely to need an abortion. We know that most of the women who get abortions are women who, have a child, are poor, are not married, and don't have a college degree. But what you often have is these women who are quite well off, college educated, married or single, but definitely not mothers, the kind of people who would never need an abortion, and yet this is their number one issue.
Correct.
And I think that those two things are related, the sort of fantasy that women are still oppressed, and then all of the women least likely to need an abortion making it their number one issue, which is kind of mysterious if you think about it, because all of those women actually do have very pressing issues related to the economy, related to immigration, related to crime and safety, but they pick the thing that they're least likely to actually need. And I think it's related to this, what I call oppression envy, that afflicts the upper classes, which is they want to see themselves as virtuous, but in the left's model today, virtue and oppression are one and the same thing, and so they have to come up with ways in which to see themselves as oppressed. That's my take on it. What do you think?
I think at the beginning there, you just declared, Batya, a war on women, and I want to join this. because I think us men are losing, and we have to fight a rearguard battle against women who are doing better than us. No, I mean, I think the abortion issue, which is, if that was polling, internal polling, external polling, 10th in these issues, they would never talk about it. This is number one for them. So in this scenario, they're just going to have these vapid conversations, which really frustrates me. I mean, it doesn't make a difference what I think about these things. I have been pro-choice, to use the language, for as long as I can remember. I remain so. But, I just think these are useless conversations when somebody is saying, like, well, do men even know? That's not, to somebody who's opposed to abortion, it's not about your body. It's about the fetus's body, right? So this is these are not real conversations. They're just fake conversations that are filling up air and saying, we are good on this issue, vote for us. The second thing about that kind of drives me crazy is the humorous nature of, why did you pick this podcast? The interesting thing about that is it doesn't matter the question, right? I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump, and I'm quite open about that. Never have, and never will.
Well, we'll see about that. We still have a few
We'll see about
weeks.
that. But the frustrating thing is to have another candidate in which every time there's an answer, I don't care the question. I don't give a shit. Sorry, we can say that. I don't care that it's why did you come onto this podcast? Because watch the answer again. It is the mind which just fills the air with nonsense of saying, well, I think that this show is about the listeners. What do you think that we're doing? You think that we're doing this for us? I mean, what does that even mean? So you go on from that to the CBS interview, the 60 Minutes interview, which was very useful.
Shockingly.
And I gotta say, I'm seeing these tweets last night, more useless Kamala Harris, Tim Waltz softballs, because Tim Waltz goes on to Jimmy Kimmel, and Jimmy Kimmel was like, why are you the best person that's ever lived and not the greatest person? It's so bizarre. But the 60 Minutes, two things about that very quickly. Bill Whitaker, was that who it is? Can we get a fact check on that? Absolutely phenomenal. Give that man a raise.
It was great.
How do we not know more about him? How is he not getting more 60-minute segments? That was a good interview. It wasn't showy. It wasn't about him. He was just saying, Madam Vice President, I asked you this question. The answer on Iran, which they cut out, was mystifying, but there was a couple others which were just these stews of words that made no sense and didn't answer very basic questions. And I find it very frustrating. I just find it frustrating, answer the damn question. You are applying for the biggest, most powerful job in the world, and you cannot answer direct questions. What is the problem?
I think, to me, what's even more shocking is that Harris has this almost she herself seems surprised that she's supposed to be able to answer the questions. And I think it's because she correctly understands that she's not meant to be herself a figurehead. She is meant to reflect a team behind her who are telling her what to say and how to answer these questions. Her job is to memorize what they told her to say.
And it's very obvious.
And
right?
it's very obvious, but I think it's almost like she herself has understood her assignment, right?
Yeah.
She does not seem at all embarrassed that for so long her team was keeping her from doing interviews on the assumption that she would not be able to handle them, right? Because she has correctly understood that it is not meant to be about her. It's meant to be about this sort of permanent bureaucratic class of Democratic operatives. And of course, we all know what they do when they have a very weak president like Joe Biden at the helm. They open the border, Alejandro Mayorkas. They make a mess in the Middle East, Tony Blinken, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
It's funny because I'm somebody who rarely gives Donald Trump credit for anything beyond being quite funny. The one thing in this context that I'll give him credit for is I don't typically like his answers, but there's a bluntness to, he doesn't avoid questions. One thing you can say about Donald Trump is what are you going to do on this issue? Unfortunately for America, he sometimes just makes it up on the fly and says, we're going to have a shutdown until we figure out what's happening. That was something that happened as a reaction to the crowd, basically. That wasn't like a policy position that they were putting out. So he's the exact opposite of this, where he's formulating policy on the fly. There was a question on the 60 Minutes interview, and it is the one that I have seen stump more Democratic candidates. And I would say to all of the journalists out there who are interviewing Democratic candidates, Two examples. Last night, Kamala Harris on 60 Minutes. A couple years ago, Bill Maher asking the same question on his show of Bernie Sanders, who is not easily stumpable. He is a very good interview, regardless of what you think of his politics. The question was, how are you going to pay for it? I go and watch it. Just go and watch that clip, and in the comments on Twitter, tell us what you think of the answer, because I couldn't make heads or tails of it. When you see the policy, it's like, well, that's going to cost trillions of dollars. We are in a place now, the government spending is so outrageous that it doesn't mean anything anymore. You could make up a new number and it's like, yeah, we have a lot of big numbers.
And I just want to again contrast that, excuse me, very briefly with Donald Trump's plan. So the Harris plan requires how you're going to pay for that because it involves getting money and then redistributing it. It's that sort of redistribution model. But you look at Trump's model, it's not redistributionist, it is protectionist in nature. And he wrote a great op-ed for us at Newsweek in which he laid this all out, in which he said, here is my economic plan. None of it involves giving people money. It all involves creating an economy that through the free market, through a little bit of help, protectionist help, does that work on its own. All right, up next we have our boss, Barry Weiss. We're so excited to have her joining us to talk about her most recent story. It is truly, truly explosive. You do not want to miss this. But first, here is a trailer for our latest episode of Swing State Debates, which saw Ben Kowaller moderate a debate about immigration in Phoenix, Arizona. What could be more relevant? It premieres today on thefp.com and the Free Press YouTube channel. Stay tuned for more.
That this administration has opened the border is completely false.
The difference between the DNC and the RNC platform on this is it specifies immigration compared to an invasion.
Can you define invasion?
When you see on a camera that there's 10,000, 20,000 people that are marching to the United States, it is common sense that that's going to create a problem.
We have to get some facts straight. Undocumented people commit way less crimes.
We have people blending in and they're taking advantage of the system. So yes, if we need to deport, I'm all for it.
What is the percentage of that? What is the
Doesn't matter whether it's a
percentage of that?
percentage or not. The point is that they're here.
My name is Michael Gomez. I'm a musician based in Dallas, Texas, and I subscribe to the Free Press. I subscribe to the Free Press because I value integrity within the media. I value different voices. I value the marketplace of ideas, and I value a respect for an audience that seeks the truth. One of my favorite episodes of the Honestly podcast was a feature on the revival that happened at Asbury University, because I know that Honestly was seeking to shed light on a world and a segment of the population that maybe isn't as well known. Evangelical Christianity is its own smaller subset of what I would imagine the greater Honestly podcast audience to be. But the subject matter was treated with respect, was treated with a genuine curiosity. That's why it stood out to me. I subscribe to the Free Press, and you can too at thefp.com.
All right, what we know, ready? All right, welcome back to the Free Press Live. As promised, at the top, a very special guest for us. Very special, the Duce herself, the Free Press editor-in-chief, Barry Weiss.
I make Nellie call me that.
Yes. We got her in the newsroom because she had a scoop yesterday. The article is titled, How CBS is Marking October 7th by Admonishing Tony DeCouple. And if you missed the interview that Tony DeCouple did on CBS, and this is just him doing what journalists do, doing his job and asking what we here at the Free Press think are pretty obvious questions of Ta-Nehisi Coates about his anti-Israel book.
Why does Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I've known for a long time, read his work for a long time, very talented, smart guy, leave out so much?
So handsome.
Why
Tony
leave
DeCouple.
out that Israel is surrounded by countries that want to eliminate it? Why leave out that Israel deals with terror groups that want to eliminate it? Why not detail anything of the first and the second intifada, the cafe bombings, the bus bombings, the little kids blown to bits? And is it because you just don't believe that Israel, in any condition, has a right to exist?
All right, the Free Press obtained some leaked audio of a CBS editorial meeting in which DeKuppel was trashed by his bosses in front of his colleagues for asking questions. His job. Let's take a listen.
There are times we fail our audiences and we fail each other. We're in one of those times right now. And it's been growing. And now we are at a tipping point. Many of you have reached out to express concerns over recent reporting, specifically about the CBS Mornings Coates interview from last week, as well as comments made coming out of some of our correspondents' reporting. I want to thank every single one who reached out for your honesty, your transparency, and your commitment. So I want to address three things. Number one, after a review of our coverage, including the interview, it's clear there are times we have not met our editorial standards. Number two, this has been addressed, and it will continue to be in the future. And number three, I want to acknowledge and I want to apologize that it's taken this long to have this conversation.
We're taking so long to have this conversation, so we decided to have it on October 7th, correct?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
That's the cherry on top here. Barry, I watched this interview when it happened, and I was pleasantly surprised that there was some good, push and pull from Tony. How does this fail editorial standards? I mean, you listen to these calls. What is the actual complaint here? Because this is, from what I know of this job that we do, what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, no, the actual complaint is that Tony DeKuppel committed the sin of doing real journalism on morning TV. And of course, the reason that this is a sin in this case is because of the subject, which is Israel, and a book that Ta-Nehisi Coates, in his extensive press tour, has bragged about how he has said that the idea that the conflict between the Israelis and the Arabs is not only not complicated, but the idea that it's complicated is, quote, horseshit.
Yeah.
He does not mention, and I really recommend that everyone goes and reads Coleman Hughes's extensive review of this book in our pages. He does not mention, I mean, I have it here. Let's just see, because I want to make sure I'm getting it right. He doesn't mention terrorism, Hamas, Hezbollah, October 7th. I mean, it's like writing a book about the Civil War without mentioning slavery. I mean, there's so much missing information. It's more like a lie.
Tony, that pointed question, by the way, on this, because he writes mostly about the West Bank, and that's the only place he visited, says, what about the Second Intifada? You don't mention it. If you don't mention that, you don't understand what's happening in the West Bank today.
Right. It's
a fair question.
Do you want to understand why there are checkpoints?
Yeah.
You cannot understand that without going back to a history where people in Sbarro's pizzerias and cafes and buses and schools were blown up. So to not mention that would raise some questions. And the thing is, at CBS, when they have, I don't know, a Republican on, when they have someone who, is a vociferous advocate for the Second Amendment on, when they have any number of people on, you would expect CBS to do its job, would challenge that person.
Yes.
So why in this case was it unacceptable? Why in this case did it lead not only to that call, you heard some of the audio from it, but today to a DEI session with, some DEI guy called Donald Grant. You should go look up his Instagram. There's some really colorful and amazing things on it.
Something else.
As if that's the solution.
Yeah.
And we should note that CBS's chief legal correspondent, a woman called Jan Crawford.
What a hero.
Balls of steel.
What a hero, Jan Crawford.
Balls of steel in that call, where she's like, wait, hold on.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
I watched that interview and thought, this is exactly what we're meant to do as journalists.
Correct.
This is the entire thing.
Yeah.
Our job is to challenge people that have self-described one-sided positions in Ta-Nehisi Coates' case on the topic to make sure that we're giving the full picture to our audience. If he's getting in trouble for doing that, she basically asks, I don't know how to do my job. And am I going to get in trouble for doing the thing that I thought we were all here to do in the first place. And then they basically don't answer the question, and the top brass at CBS says, let's go into our office and we'll talk to you separately.
No, I mean,
When I first saw that clip with Ta-Nehisi Coates, I was so thrilled because I've been trying to make this argument that anti-Zionism is just wokeness Middle East edition forever. You take, the distinction that Western civilization is built on, that there's a distinction between right versus wrong, and you throw that away and replace it with the distinction between powerful versus powerless, and then you superimpose skin color onto that, and boom, whoever has less power is the victim and is always inherently virtuous, including during the Second Intifada when they're blowing up children. And whoever has allegedly more power is therefore inherently evil and therefore is always, always at fault and has all the agency. And the side with less power has no moral responsibilities, right? And then, so I'm trying to make this argument since October 7th, and then the patron saint of wokeness himself, Ta-Nehisi Coates, shows up and literally makes it for us, right? He literally says what I just said, but saying not as a critique, but this is the worldview. I thought it was such a great and telling clip, and it's so amazing to me because the clip did what you're not allowed to do, which is to expose the wokeness for the amoral, empty worldview that it is. And I mean, such a kudos, Barry, for getting this scoop, because what you hear in that scoop, though, in the clip we just played, is the obeisance to the temper tantrum, right, from the top brass, but as if it is courage, right? She had this
I want to thank you all for
exactly
complaining.
like
That was my favorite
you're
bit.
so brave,
You
and
rats.
I'm so brave for listening to you when it is the height of cowardice, right? Is just caving to this. But here's what I want to ask you, Barry. To me, this is not. It doesn't feel like 2020 anymore. It doesn't feel like the winds are in the sails of the cowards. It seems to me, and maybe this is just my bubble, that this piece that you guys ran, the expose of this horrifying punishment for the crime of journalism, is being met with a lot of anger at CBS for how it's handling this, that we have sort of turned the tide, we're in the woke lash, people don't want to see this kind of thing. What do you think? Do you think that's true?
It's interesting. It's hard for me to tell because in a certain sense, like, the pattern recognition that I have around a story like this is like, this is the same story over again. It's like, okay, some people, maybe in a Slack channel, I've heard different things from different people at CBS, got mad about the interview. They wrote some letters. They, hung the charge of, the charge of the accusation of racism over the heads of CBS top brass, and lo and behold, you had that call yesterday.
I have to ask, do you have an emotional, trauma response?
No.
Because this exact thing happened to you.
Yeah, but at this point, it's like, we know how it goes. It's
did you feel like you're going to start another company? Did you say that? It's like, well, this again?
Well, I have to say, every moment like this is a recruiting opportunity.
Yes,
for the
exactly.
That was my first thought.
Tony, are you listening?
I hope you're watching.
Yes.
Well, it made me, I'm so far beyond it at this point that I don't have a trauma response. I just have a feeling of like, oh God, like kind of like, here we go again. But we know exactly how the story goes.
But isn't that kind of the punishment? They can't get away with firing or sanctioning someone for asking questions. I think that's too far. I think they would know.
But they could have in 2020.
They could have in 2020. They placate them, and it's very 2020 in the sense that, like, you ask a couple of hard questions and then somebody gets $200,000 to come in and do a DEI training session. It literally makes no sense. But if you know these things in the past, you've been through this, the point is to create the atmosphere in which you don't ask those questions again, and your colleagues kind of hate you. I mean, we work in a business in which, at Hachette, when Woody Allen's book was going to come out, never been convicted of a crime, people walked out lest they publish a book. And as I pointed out at the time, Hachette had on its list a book by a mass murderer who killed for the mob. That was fine, right? In this kind of instinct now that, like, we can't be around people who have these, dissenting views, particularly on CBS. That's kind of like the closest we get to a national broadcast.
But that is what's so powerful about what this legal correspondent, Jan Crawford, said on the call. This is what she said. it sounds like we're calling out one of our anchors in a somewhat public setting for failing to meet editorial standards for, I'm not even sure what.
Yes.
I thought our commitment was to the truth. And when someone comes on air with a one-sided account of a very complex situation, as Coates himself acknowledges that he has, I thought we were obligated to challenge that worldview. He prevented a one-sided account from being broadcast on our network that was completely devoid of history or facts. And as someone, she says, who does a lot of interviews, I'm not sure how to proceed in an interview.
What a hero.
But it's like, so we know now,
Yeah.
like what this call and the recording that you heard and what the response to CBS will convey to anyone who does not have a high-profile, bold-faced name.
Of course. Yeah.
Right? Think about the 25-year-old that works there, the 26-year-old that works there, the person that wants to become one of the anchors. What message does it send to them? What kind of chilling atmosphere does it create? I think it's also worth pointing out one more thing, and that is the unbelievable double standard at CBS and at so many other places. Go back to 2020. Think about the kinds of things that were said by Tony's co-host on the show, by Gayle King. She said, and I want to quote this. This is what she said on May 26, 2020, of course, in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd. I'm speechless. I'm really, really speechless. And she was fighting back tears about what we're seeing on television. It feels to me like open season, like there's no safe place in this country for Black men. And she was saying that holding back tears. We accept and in fact celebrate when the right kind of people with the right kind of identities bring their lived experience to bear on journalism. In that case, it's celebrated, it's embraced, it's held up as a moment of vulnerability and honesty and authenticity, and it should be.
Which also Tony didn't do.
But it's
I point out, it was not a personal thing for him, though, and I want to ask you this question. This is something that I had a conversation with a mutual friend of ours about.
We just should point out that he has Jewish children who live in Israel.
Yeah, so he has...
But he does not even, you're right, he doesn't even bring that to bear in the conversation, and yet it's as if he's being punished for that association.
Well,
sorry,
that
Michael,
was
go ahead.
said. He has two Jewish children from his first wife, and they all live in Israel. I don't even believe that Tony's Jewish, but they live in Israel.
He converted, actually.
And good for him. I'm in the process of that, I think, by being on the show.
By assimilation. This is assimilation.
This is my conversion, this show. But there was a number of people on Twitter who said that this absolutely stunned me, and I couldn't get anyone to be as stunned as I was, that this should have been explained at the top of the show. That this is a conflict of interest. Having people living in a democratic country is a conflict of interest. Imagine if I had to say that about, a story in Sweden, is that my ex-wife is Swedish and my daughter has a Swedish passport. So just so you know, I might be very pro-Swedish on this story. No, it's for only one place and one people. And I couldn't believe that no one, copped onto this argument on Twitter that you should say, oh, well, I have a vested interest. Well, yes, we all should have a vested interest in kids not being killed. All right. Well, I could go on.
What a note to end on.
What a note to end on. Why am I doing this? All right. Thank you so much, Barry. Very fun.
What are you supposed to call me?
Il Duce. But up next, we have, speaking of Israel, Haviv Rettig Gur. He's joining us from Jerusalem. And I'll tell you what, if you haven't seen Haviv's work, the only positive thing I can think of in the past year is me getting a familiarity with Haviv, who is absolutely brilliant. But before we go to Haviv, can you please check out this clip of Barry's recent interview with another righteous Gentile, Douglas Murray, and you can watch the whole interview on the Free Press's YouTube channel. Check it out, people.
Speaking of publications you admire, I want to quote something from the BBC. Today. Shortly after Iran launched these ballistic missiles against Israel, one of its commentators said this, and I promise you it is not satire. The international community has to make sure that whatever Israel does is not upending the regional order as we know it. We've been in this for 12 months now, of constant red lines being crossed, mostly by the Israelis. Hezbollah and Iran have played it fairly rationally, trying to always be cautious in how they respond, trying to leave off-ramps where they could.
Yeah, I know. This is a. By the way, this moron is a teacher at King's College in London. He worked for 4 years for the Qatari government. He was in the pay of the Qatari government. He now teaches at King's College London, which is funded by the Qataris. Why the British Broadcasting Corporation should be inviting on people who are in the pay of Qatar, which is the mini terror state to Iran's great terror state in the region, I don't know. But that's why you get moronic commentary like that. I know, it's so sad. It's so sad that the regional status quo of firing missiles at Israel can't be retained, isn't it? It's barbaric, isn't it? The same thing happened on after one of the recent bouts against Hezbollah. One of the BBC, the Sky commentators said that Hezbollah had been appallingly provoked by Israel, provoked beyond toleration, really. Poor Hezbollah. There they were, simply wanting to launch rockets in peace. And then they got disrupted. It's beastly. Absolutely beastly. No, the status quo that has existed was rancid and rotten and anti-Israel, and it had no right to continue. But these people, I mean, we have to ask ourselves in all these institutions, how do you end up with one of these Qatari stooges at a Qatari-funded institution in London, giving his Qatari propaganda for a terror state on the British Broadcasting Corporation? It's rot all the way down. Rot in the media, supported by rotted institutions of rotten states like Qatar, which think they've bought us.
And maybe they have.
Oh, we should turn that round. They think they own us. They are one of the weakest states in the world. It's a few 100,000 people,
and yet
with a disgusting crime family at its head, and the people own slave after slave in that country. It's a slave-owning state with a couple of 100,000 people who actually have some money, and they think they've bought America and Britain? Seriously?
Well, we're cheap. That's the lesson I'm taking from the fact that some of our greatest universities are willing to have outposts in these countries.
Yeah, I mean,
our bankers, our bankers, our sports teams spit, and you will hit someone in this neighborhood that's a paid up, I don't know, we're not going to say a Qatari agent, but on the Qatari payroll in some way.
Yeah.
Yesterday marked the 1-year anniversary of the October 7th attacks when Hamas terrorists murdered over 1,200 Israelis and took 250 hostages. We have Haviv Rettig Gur, a political correspondent and senior analyst for the Times of Israel, joining us from Jerusalem. Haviv is probably the most important journalist in Israel, at least as far as I'm concerned. I find myself turning to Haviv not just for information, not just for analysis, but for emotional and moral and spiritual support at this difficult time. So we are so grateful to you, Haviv. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about what the atmosphere is like in Israel right now?
I think yesterday was surprisingly difficult. Obviously, there was an instinct to start trading on social media, passing around the videos, the traumatic videos of many times of people we know. We are good friends of a family that had 8 members, including a 4-year-old girl, taken hostage on October 7, and family members also killed. It's I don't know, most everyone I know, my neighbors, my friends, they kind of got off social media, and they kind of ran away from, we had a couple of big dramatic national ceremonies that people tuned into, but mostly it was about staying close to people you know. We got in touch with people affected directly by October 7. It was a coming to, it was a remember. That's a great question. How do you summarize a year? It's been a year that never ended, I think is the answer. It's a year, it's a day that still is going on. The enemies that surround us, the forces that have developed this strategy of coming for us and hurting us until we eventually evaporate, which is how they talk about us. have only upped the ante and expanded the fronts. And so the fundamental point seems to me to be that Israelis feel like this is a war launched on October 7 that they still are very much in. I have family members called up now to the reserves in the north. Iran is activating every proxy. It has been for 11 months, 12 months, activating every proxy it has. It feels like an event that's still very much active and moving.
You know, I think there's such a gap between how I think things feel in Israel and how they seem from here. I mean, looking at it from here, it seems like, you know, Israel just had these massive victories, right? The amazing historic pager attack, you know, killing Nasrallah. Things seem to be going pretty well. They staved off this Iranian attack. It does seem like much of the Hamas leadership is dead, gone. You know, it seems that the momentum is behind Israel. Is that something that Israelis are also feeling, or is there a gap there?
The momentum is emphatically with Israel. I would say more than that. If you had talked to Israelis 4 months ago, you would have heard a lot of pessimism and a lot of fear for the future. And it's not fear for the future because we have a sense that our enemies are these immense and powerful threats to us. They're trying to be, but there tends to be a correlation between ruining your own society, being tyrannical and dictatorial and rather abusive to your own people, and wanting to destroy Israel. That tends to, not everywhere, not everyone, but tends to be. And so our enemies are almost self-defeating in that sense. The Iran, I think, has something like 10 times Israel's population and not a very much larger GDP. So it's, you know, we have these enemies that when we decided to pick up that baton, to get up from October 7, dust ourselves off, and make sure it doesn't happen again, to never fall back into this strategic concept, this sort of stupor that we were in, that said that everyone was deterred and the status quo will continue forever, but to understand that we face enemies that actually want to annihilate us. The moment we did that, we became very, very dangerous. And what you saw in Lebanon, that was the crown, the jewel in the crown of the Iranian proxy system. That was the Iranian Empire's great force. When Iran needed to prop up Assad and prevent him from falling, they sent Hezbollah there. When they needed to train the Houthis how to launch missiles, the Houthis can barely piece together bread lines and bakeries. And when they needed competent people to teach them how to handle missiles, they sent Hezbollah. Hezbollah is shattered. It's still there. It's still very much operational. Local commanders have access to large stockpiles of weapons, but it isn't what it was. And I submit to you, and most Israelis think this, and we have polling on this, Iran is far less than it appears. And now that Israel believes that and knows that and feels that, the region is, we are starting to shape our strategic environment instead of just being bludgeoned by it and attacked by it.
Haviv, obviously quite different here in the US yesterday on the October 7th anniversary. I mean, there's a unity in Israel, obviously a very fractious political environment, particularly before with the judicial reforms and everything. But, you know, there's a general sense of purpose and they understand what's happening, understand people are being evacuated from the north and having to leave their villages, et cetera. When you come to America, because I know you do, Haviv, I left the office yesterday in Midtown Manhattan, took a left onto Fifth Avenue, looked up 2 blocks that were empty at 6 o'clock because they were cleared by the police, and saw a coming throng of people dressed like they were in the Fedayeen, you know, with you know, wrapped up tight, fighting the police. Nobody on the side giving them thumbs up or anything like that you see in certain parades and demonstrations. But, you know, that's what we see on the anniversary of the worst slaughter of Jews since 1945. And, you know, how do you, from Israel, view this, that in the United States and also in Western Europe, particularly offensive in Berlin, that this is how this is being, you know, memorialized?
I hesitate to get into American politics, but I'll tell you what it looks like to Israelis, and just get canceled for it. Why not? It is a social sickness. It is a thin and ridiculous elite that has sold its soul to the thrill of a liberation movement it can't imagine, it can't experience, doesn't actually exist on the ground. Hamas launched its major waves of terrorism not in response to occupation, but in response to peace processes. Hamas is the great destroyer of peace processes between the Israelis and Palestinians over the last 30 years. And in order, and the sense that the thrilling to the brutality itself, to the solidarity, to the feeling that there's something in that jihadi world of authenticity and truth and sacrifice. You have an elite that is so utterly and pathetically bored. And I mean bored. I don't mean bored like you and I could be bored watching TV. I mean bored in the desperate sense of echoing meaninglessness. And so they latch on to these moral narratives that are intentionally ignorant, shrink us all down to cartoons, and allow them to live out these fantasies. And that's one piece. The second piece, the Muslim world is a big place, a diverse place, and in astonishing ways, a beautiful place with some absolutely gorgeous ideas and cultures and, frankly, cuisines. And some of it is utterly sick and collapsing and self-destructive and wants to burn the whole world down because of insane visions of ultimate redemption. And some of it of the Muslim world, you're just importing. You're importing, and your elites are excited to import these radical ideas from the Muslim world because anything that comes out of the global south must be good and anything that comes out of the west must be bad. And so you're seeing a radicalization imported wholesale from the worst things happening in the Arab and Muslim world. It's riding waves of immigration. You know, America has this very, very gentle right now. The British just came out with data. Scotland right now has a unprecedentedly low birth rate. There are 19,000 more deaths every year than births in Scotland, but the population just grew this year by more than at any year since 1941, and it's all immigration. And so you have now European countries that immigration is their fundamental demographic fact, and most people are good people, general rule of life. Some of them, and at large numbers when you have that scale, are going to be these radicals, and they're going to change society. And that's what you're seeing. You're seeing that merger.
Let me ask you briefly a question of leadership. When Israelis look at the American presidential election, I know they felt very grateful to Biden for the early support. Of course, now it's been a lot more ambivalent. There's a report that the Harris-Biden team leaked the Israeli targets in Iran to the New York Times. Who are Israelis thinking would have their backs more between Trump and Harris? And then in terms of Bibi Netanyahu, you've been so incredible on the topic because I don't think you're a big fan, and yet your work steel manning his position on Dan Siener's podcast has been just so powerful. I'm wondering if Israelis are feeling differently about Bibi after the last month and all of the successes in the north.
Let me try and answer what ordinary Israelis think, both about Biden or Harris, Trump, and also about Netanyahu. We know, I mean, there are polls on this, so I can just report easy facts. Trump beats Harris in Israel. And Biden was more popular than Harris, probably just because he's well known. Israelis speak Hebrew in their daily lives. They are provincial foreigners. They don't actually follow day to day the culture wars of America. But Trump seems to be a little bit more pro-us, a little bit less, difficult lately. And so they're responding to that. But Israelis who tend to favor Trump or tend to favor Harris, these are not strong preferences many times. They kind of think whoever's good for Israel, whoever. They all share a sense that America is totally incoherent. And that's the real view. What the heck is the American policy? You arm us massively and then release sanctions on Iran that allows Iran to arm the IRGC massively. Isn't that funding both sides of a war? What is the American, if America cut all aid to Israel of every kind, but massively and seriously confronted Iran? Iran has developed in the Middle East a new way of war, and it has to do with technological advances that allow small groups that you wouldn't look at, you wouldn't bother with, the Houthis, backward tribes in the desert that can't run themselves, allows them using new weapons, new missiles, new kinds of technologies to become strategic weapons of war. They have doubled the cost of a container going from China to Europe with nothing, with no actual investment. And America's response to that has been the most anemic and ridiculous and careful. And it's not because CENTCOM doesn't have solutions. It's not because the Israeli bombing of Hodeidah that made the Houthis finally sit up and notice that there are vast costs to what they're doing is something the Americans can't do more easily. And CENTCOM wants to do these things. It's the politics. You have real interests, real threats. If America were to face down Iran in a serious way for global order, to end the massive, horrific wars of the Middle East, people think that Gaza is a big deal. There's a constellation of forces that put Gaza at the top of the Western consciousness. Gaza is one of the smallest wars we've had of the big wars in this region in the last decade. 250,000 Yemenis starved to death just a few years ago in a war. America could have pushed back on Iran. Without Iran, Assad could not have committed his multiple genocides in Syria. Syria was a country that 13 years ago was 10% Christian. This was one of the oldest Christian communities in the world. Syria today is not even 2% Christian. That is a genocide by the definition that we keep hearing about genocide, and nobody cares and nobody notices, and even America, never mind the entire West, won't confront Iran. Never mind Israeli aid, just confront Iran. And if you won't confront Iran, at least don't, while arming us, release their sanctions money so that they can run amok in the Middle East and destroy nations. So that incoherence, right? We now have to hit back on Iran. The Americans are demanding, in order for them to support us in doing so, and there could be a real blowback from Iran, and we want that support, are demanding that we pass the plans by them first for approval. And then they leak them. And then they leak even worse than leaking the targets. Jake Sullivan released quotes from his meeting with the Israeli minister Ron Dermer, in which he said, "We don't trust you Israelis. We don't believe these different plans you're showing us." Just that sense that Israel works at the behest of the American empire is absolutely, exactly, and precisely the opposite message. You want to prevent a war, make Israel look dangerous. You want to prevent a war, make Israel look like the uncontrollable, right, wounded tiger, right? Hold me back kind of a thing. But America doesn't appear to understand any of that. And so it arms two sides and constantly weakens its own allies and doesn't understand why its allies don't trust it and doesn't understand why the little Houthis can stop world trade.
Haviv, thank you so much for joining us. Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. Be well.
Thank you so much.
Up next, we have Joe Nocera coming in to speak with us about how the hurricane response in North Carolina and how Elon Musk had to get involved. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
My name is Rob Armstrong. I'm an oral and maxillofacial surgeon in Swansboro, North Carolina. Now I'm a subscriber to the Free Press because I believe that traditional journalism is not dead. I've been a subscriber since the beginning. I don't feel like I'm ever forced on a particular narrative. I feel like it's journalism the way journalism used to be. I don't feel like I'm being forced here to one side. I feel like I'm given the information and make my own decisions. And it's fair. Holman Hughes, as a writer, I think is just a brilliant mind and a great voice for that generation. I really enjoy the podcast as well, honestly, with Barry. The one recently with Sheryl Sandberg about the tragedy of October 7th, that was a very moving and sad and important at the same time. You can subscribe to the Free Press by going to bfp.com.
I am Meredith Curry. I live in Northern California. I subscribe to the Free Press. I definitely feel part of a community as a subscriber to the Free Press. Just the way that the writing is done, it feels very personable. I really appreciate that they believe in truth and that they report honestly. The Free Press asks hard questions. and doesn't expect a black and white answer. They explore different perspectives, opinions, and viewpoints, and that's so crucial to understanding one another. My favorite podcast was The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. It was a huge reflection on where we are as a culture right now. Also, I really appreciated the interview with Abigail Schreier because she is yet another journalist who says the hard things out loud. I subscribe to the Free Press because it stands for the values that unite us as Americans. And you can subscribe too at thefp.com.
All right, we are back, and joining us now, I think deputy managing editor. Is that correct, Joe Nocera? You are the deputy managing editor of the Free Press.
That is correct. Yeah.
That is a vaunted title. He is the co-author of a piece that you can find on the homepage this morning about Starlink, Elon Musk, and FEMA and the hurricane recovery. Joe, give us an idea of the premise of this story.
The premise is pretty simple. 2 years ago, the Federal Communications Commission turned down Elon Musk's deal to build Starlinks in rural communities for $885 million. They would have, put thousands and thousands of Starlinks in rural communities all over the place, including North Carolina, including Tennessee, including Georgia, including Florida. So then, scroll to the hurricane. What is it that people immediately need after a hurricane? They need to be able to communicate. Some people need to get rescued. Some people need to find out if their relative is still alive. How do they do that? Well, a lot of independent people having nothing to do with the federal government started buying up Starlinks. And Robbie Starbuck in particular got in touch with Elon Musk, who of course owns SpaceX, and which in turn owns Starlink, and they started shipping Starlink to the areas that were really destroyed, and they started putting them up like crazy. Yeah. And they've made a giant difference, and so.
But why was that rejected initially? I mean, you see every campaign is you get at some point broadband will be mentioned. We got to bring broadband to certain parts of the country. This seems like a pretty good solution. Was it just the character in politics of Elon Musk?
It's very hard to know for sure. I mean, obviously, the Democrats and the FCC, which turned it down, say it was not political at all, that Starlink didn't meet the burden, blah, 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 blah. And but if it didn't meet the burden, then why in 2024 is everybody using them and they're working just fine? Yeah. So, and the Republicans on the FCC have said, this is political. This is part of the Biden administration's ongoing harassment of Elon Musk and his companies. And I've looked into this and enough to think that there is something to the idea, whether the FCC did this for political reasons or not. They have been on his ass quite a bit. There's like 7 different agencies that have investigations of one sort or another. I mean, they're still investigating the purchase of Twitter, for crying out loud. Come on, fellas, get over yourselves.
The one that infuriated me the most was he had a commitment at Tesla, I believe, to only hire for a certain level American citizens. And they went after him over that. And that echoes a lot of the criticism that you're hearing now about the FEMA response, FEMA telling the survivors of this hurricane that they're out of money when they have billions and billions of dollars. Now, I understand that it's... I understand that it's a different tranche of money.
Blame that on Congress. Blame that on Congress. Congress allocates money. Congress allocated those billions to,
No, I'm not blaming FEMA. I'm blaming the Democrats. Let's be clear.
Of course you are.
Yes,
of course you are.
Yes,
it wouldn't be you if you weren't blaming the Democrats.
I don't care, about FEMA. But how is an average American supposed to feel when they are constantly getting put last, and people who are not Americans seemingly have access to all of this capital and all of these opportunities. It's this kind of, it seems to me like the Democrats have been trying to, I don't believe the voting thing. I don't think that they want these people
Can
as
you see
voters.
me rolling my eyes, people? Just checking.
But I do think that there is this feeling like they're trying to erase the distinction between citizen and non-citizen and take away a little bit of what it's supposed to mean to be an American citizen.
The bottom line is, I'm just not even gonna go there. The bottom line is that what FEMA is good at is giving people money to rebuild. And they will give people money to rebuild. What FEMA is bad at is dealing with situations in the immediate wake of an emergency. FEMA is not good. They're just not. They were terrible during Katrina. They were terrible during Hurricane Sandy. I watched them in Hurricane Sandy. I went down on Long Island and watched them. They were terrible. And during COVID, I mean, they were literally stealing PPE that was supposed to go to hospitals as the boats came in. So, you know, I don't want to defend FEMA at all. The point of my article, which was not about non-citizens versus citizens, the point of my article was that you had this technology that could have saved a lot of people, that could have helped a lot of people, and they would have been installed by 2024. And Elon Musk has done a lot of good. I mean, the real point of my story is that it doesn't matter if Elon Musk is a Trumper or whatever. It just doesn't. What matters is he gets shit done. And any president should not be harassing him. They should be embracing him. And they should be saying, I mean, my God, there are 2 astronauts in the International Space Station who are marooned because the Boeing rocket that took them up there is broken. How are they going to get them back? SpaceX, Elon Musk, SpaceX. I mean, they should be patting this guy on the back left and right. So that's really what my article was about. It was not about non-citizens versus citizens. There'll be plenty of time for Batya to talk about that week after week after week after week after week.
Yeah. Joe, the first thing, I mean, you're right, I think, about this with Musk, who has, I think, very goofy politics and tweets some like crazy stuff. But, I mean, in so many ways, you can look at him as a liberal hero of doing things for the environment. I mean, Tesla's been a great, the SpaceX, et cetera, et cetera. The thing that is interesting, and I don't know if because I haven't been following him on Twitter, because you're talking kind of about some of these, talk to this guy, Robbie Starbuck, who's like a right-wing troll in some ways, but I'll give him credit if he's actually delivering on these things, which is good for him. People are talking a lot now about some of this misinformation, which is a word that I don't trust anymore. But what is going on out there in Twitter world, in Trump world? It's obviously an election season. You're going to have a lot of stuff that's not true to try to score some political points. Are these kind of memes that are out there, are any of them true that beyond just the general fecklessness of FEMA?
Well, here's a oh God, I'm going to get this is going to cause me a lot of trouble at this particular table. So so basically, Musk used to be with the Democrats, and he switched to Trump, and he's become a true Trumper, like almost nobody else on Twitter. And so one of his big things is that the border crisis has been created by Democrats so they can get illegal immigrants into the country who will vote Democratic, and there will never be a swing state again because the Democrats will never lose another election. Now, I happen to think that's bullshit. But I know that the woman on my left thinks it's true.
I just said I don't think that's true.
Oh.
I literally just said I don't think it's about votes. I think it's about the economy. I think it's about driving down the wages of the working class. I don't buy the voting argument. I want to ask this though. There are things about Elon Musk that I really, really admire. I think that at a time when the far right influencer sphere that he's a part of was teetering on the verge of sort of anti-Zionist, anti-Semitism, he made a very strong stand in favor of, Israel and Jews, and I really admire that and respect that. I was very shocked by it. I really admire and respect everything you're pointing to. I think he's an employer. He's a jobs creator. I think he's, the conditions when you talk to people who work for him, the conditions are pretty good. They get paid higher than the industry standard and so forth. The thing that worried me the most about him is that his entire supply chain for Tesla is in China. And so as a result, he's incredibly obeisant to the Chinese Communist Party. He has never once criticized them. He acts the maverick here, but he's always bending the knee to China because he has to. His entire financial future depends on that. And to me, that is very troubling as somebody who's getting closer and closer to Donald Trump. That is very scary to me. People, you have these corporations like Apple that really operate more almost like, independent contractors of the CCP than they do like an American company. And I'm just wondering, do you ever think about this? He built a showroom for Tesla in Xinjiang, which is where the genocide of the Uyghurs is happening.
Well,
stuff like that.
It is a problem. First of all, his batteries are made in the U.S., and that's a big deal.
But the chips in the batteries are made in China.
But
yes,
and he also has, it's really interesting what's going on with him in China, because the Chinese are now trying to promote their own electric vehicle industry, and they're cutting back on the ability of Tesla, which has factories there. They're cutting back on the ability of Tesla to make electric vehicles. So I think he's going to start to get squeezed by the Chinese, and he's going to start to feel the same pain that a lot of other companies are feeling. Apple, you're right. Apple is completely dependent on China. Listen, so much of our economy is dependent on Chinese labor. That if they were to shut it down, which they won't because they can't, but if they were to shut it down, we'd go out of business, basically. I agree. It's a big problem. I will say this. I do want to say one other thing. The thing I love most about Elon Musk is that he invented a means that when the first stage of the rocket goes, the SpaceX rocket goes up in the air, it comes down and it lands on a effing trampoline. So they can use it again, and it saves 90% of the cost. It's an amazing, amazing technical accomplishment.
Joe Nocera.
Now I'm done.
That's, thanks for joining us, Joe, and telling us about the trampolines. I'm gonna have to check that out because I don't know what that means, because I don't know anything about space, because kind of a dope on these things. But check out Joe's piece over at thefp.com. Elon succeeded where FEMA failed. It is not about immigration, by the way. All right, stay with us. We're gonna come back to one of my favorite segments, the hardest one to figure out when somebody asks, what are we gonna talk about? The bad take of the week. We're drowning in bad takes. So, that's coming up next. But before that, we're gonna take a look at, this is Meredith, a subscriber. Is that right? Is that what we're doing here? No? Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Our subscriber videos, people who subscribe to the Free Press, who tell us why they do so. And this is Meredith explaining why you should too.
My name is Javier Barrera. I live in Seattle, Washington.
All right, we'll talk about
I am a subscriber to the Free Press. The Free Press exposes me to stories that the other media I consume wouldn't touch. I feel I'm a part of a community because there are several friends that I discuss some of the stories with. We'll text each other and say, did you read that story? Like, yes, what do you think? My favorite Free Press podcast is definitely The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. Amazing series. I anticipated what I was going to hear, and I could not have been more wrong. Nellie Bowles, the way she covers stories is a unique voice. And sometimes I don't necessarily care about the story she's writing about, but I care what she says about them. So it's fantastic for me. I subscribe to the Free Press, and you can too at thefp.com.
This is Mallory Gibson. I just graduated from Auburn University. I am a Free Press subscriber. I'm currently in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm a Free Press subscriber because it's just a place where I can not have to worry about the biases that may come along with current events. I do feel like I'm part of something bigger at the Free Press. Feel a sense of camaraderie with the rest of the subscribers. I mean, as the podcast associated with the Free Press is aptly named, I associate honesty with the Free Press. I really enjoyed the podcast episodes and articles with both Abigail Shrier and Jonathan Haidt. I think Ollie is also very fun. He has a little bit of comedy, a little bit of sarcasm. At the same time, he's very straight to the point, which I appreciate because sometimes I don't have 30 minutes to sit around and read the news in the mornings. Often get to read things that aren't in other news outlets. And I also read things that maybe I don't necessarily agree with, but I think that it's good for me to be able to see things from different viewpoints and not just the way that I see the world. And you can subscribe to the Free Press too at thefp.com.
All right.
Michael.
Yeah.
What's your bad take of the week?
Well, I first want to say that apparently that woman who is a subscriber is saying something nice about me, and you have incredibly good taste. And thank you. Thank you for being so clever. Yeah, bad take of the week. Again, I always have to say it, it's really hard. And kind of distaste for Donald Trump and but the media really makes me look like I support him because they say really dumb things. This is Aisha Mills. I guess she's a Democratic operative, and she said this, I think, twice on 2 different broadcasts in the same day on October 7th. And this is her on CNN talking about Donald Trump.
I think that the danger of a Donald Trump is that he would absolutely try to exterminate an entire group of people because he thinks that their genes are somehow different than his and faulty. And I say this with all the sternness that you hear in my voice because it is serious, and Americans should recognize that.
All right. I'm going to say that clip goes longer and it actually gets worse. But the extermination thing, she then compares him on multiple broadcasts to Adolf Hitler. Guys, and I'm not going to even invoke October 7th and doing things like that on a day that is, the greatest bloodletting of Jews since the Holocaust. It's just kind of gross in general. But let's be very clear about this. What Donald Trump said was stupid and offensive, but if you go back to the things that Donald Trump has said over the years about genes, there's a compilation of him saying this of people with good genes and then people with bad genes. He doesn't understand genetics, people. He just means that's the good ones, that's the bad ones. The people that come in, those are the bad guys, they have genes. He doesn't get it. To go from there to say that someone's going to exterminate a race of people might be a bit of heavy breathing, don't you think? And I want to say one final thing about this, that we've been talking about a very bad leader, in my opinion, who has some very bad policies, some decent policies too, as a fascist for a very long time. That is a corrosive thing. And to say that we are in the Weimar Republic shows a stupid misunderstanding of history, because in the last years of the Weimar Republic, people don't remember this, there were many, many, dozens in some years, and in one particular, hundreds of people being killed on the street. That was how intense the pitched political battles were before the ascent of Nazi Germany. We don't live in that time. We live in a time where we can have a show like this and have people with different opinions. Donald Trump is not in danger of exterminating his own son-in-law. I don't suspect that's going to happen.
And I think another really important thing in that take, on a more serious note, is just 98% of the material they use to accuse Trump of being racist comes from comments he's making about immigrants, mostly illegal immigrants. And again, just coming back to this theme, what they're trying to do is act like it is racist to care about your own nation, that is a question of race rather than a question of citizenship. And you saw it there. Again, he made those comments about immigrants. Okay, not the best comments. I would not say that, right? But you have this feeling like that he's talking about, the way that they cast it, it's as though he's talking about Americans of a specific race. And of course, he's not doing that at all. He's trying to emphasize the distinction between being an American and being a non-citizen and saying it should mean something to be an American.
Yeah, it's still a horrible comment. And he was talking about violent illegals who have committed crimes, committed murder, et cetera. It does contextualize it. I don't think it excuses it, but the contextualization is often ignored in these stupid cable news debates that are designed to get people like me angry. And by the way, mission accomplished. So stop being an idiot.
All right, my bad take comes from Mehdi Hassan, who was very careful to remind us on October 5th of the real cause, the real people behind 9/11. He tweeted, "Never forget that it was the destruction of Beirut by Israel in 1982 that bin Laden would later claim inspired his attack on the Twin Towers in 2001. There is such a thing as blowback, and yes, violence begets violence. Terror produces more terror." And as proof of this, he brought bin Laden's own words. And I just thought that this was so hilarious. I mean, a lot of people got really angry at this, blaming Jews for, 9/11, which of course he clearly was doing, justifying Osama bin Laden's actions, using his own letter as if accepting his logic for this is why he did it. But I just think that this is hilarious. I think the reason that I'm able to laugh at it is because it seems to me like in America, when you go full anti-Semite, you get marginalized. That is the rule, and we see it again and again and again. This kind of thing ultimately always hurts the person who says it more than it hurts the public sphere when it comes to these blessed United States of America.
I didn't see that tweet, by the way. And the reason I didn't see that is because I discovered I was blocked by Mehdi Hassan, whom I've never interacted with. So, I don't know, Mehdi, maybe you can unblock me and we can have a conversation about why I don't believe Osama bin Laden's excuse. All right, that's our show. I want to thank the big boss, Barry Weiss, the great Haviv Rettig Gur from Jerusalem, and the always scrappy Joe Nocera for joining us today. But of course, I have to save it all for the person to my left, Batya Sargon, my sparring partner. All right. Thanks for everyone for tuning in, and come back next Wednesday for the next episode of this very show, The Free Press Live. And if you haven't already, go to thefreepress.com or thefp.com, and subscribe so you don't miss anything. And to play us out, here is someone who does just that, and I hope they're talking about me.
Courtney, I'm a nurse practitioner. I am a Free Press subscriber. I am in Alameda, California. The Free Press represents to me independence of thought. I like the safe space that it provides for readers. I do not always agree with the articles I read at the Free Press, and I know as a subscriber that that's okay, that that's the point, and I love that. I do feel a sense of community as a subscriber. I feel like it's a little bit of a family that's growing. I think if I could follow around one of the reporters, it would be Olivia Reingold. All the stuff that she puts out is so interesting and off the wall, and I want to follow her around for like a month and just be at her side and be part of it. I definitely have a favorite article, the piece that Barry wrote for the University of Austin. It's called The New Founders, America Needs. And I go back to that. I love that piece. I subscribe to the Free Press, and you can subscribe too at thefp.com.